Thanks for coming. I recognize a few of you. I guess I saw some of you probably in a session earlier in the week. Is that right? Yeah, all right, cool. Yeah, I was kind of more, the getting started thing, talking more about the framework. Today we're going to dig a little bit deeper. So how many people are using Pro now? Some of you? Yeah, and the rest of you are on desktop? I guess who's on desktop? Okay, so that's, some of you are doing both then, right? Okay, cool. I'm going to be mostly oriented like within Pro. That's what I'm going to be running the demos from, but with the exception of some debugging stuff that I'm going to show, everything I'm doing in Pro, we can do in desktop as well. There's a few spots where it'll note where it's like you have to do it slightly differently, but for the most part, everything we can do in both. So so hold on. So I was kind of trying to juggle how, there was a few different concepts I kind of wanted to get through today, and I was kind of like, how can I juggle them? Because it was like this giant Venn diagram, overlapping concepts. I was trying to get it through in a way that didn't kind of muddle everything. So the way I'm kind of trying to orient the next hour or so is I talk about like code structure, partly because there's some things that'll help out a bit, but also because it kind of lends towards the debugging discussion. So then once I get through those two, then we'll get into sort of some more like traditional like validation type concepts, building geoprocessing tools. For those of you who weren't in the last session that I did on, it was Tuesday now, right? I'm Dave. I've been on the GP team for almost 15 years now, so I spend most of that time with Python, geoprocessing tools, learn a lot of documentation as well on these kind of concepts. All right. So one trick that we have, and this is more acute when it comes to talking about some of the debugging concepts, is the validation code is kind of buried and hidden away in the toolbox. Some of you know this already. That creates kind of problems, right? It's buried in there. You want to do debugging, editing, really any of those kinds of things require like a lot of button clicks just to get kind of into the toolbox and a lot of button clicks to get back out. I find when I'm doing that in kind of that traditional way, it's a lot of bouncing around. I tend to lose focus. It's a hard and kind of slow thing. So what I found works actually a lot better. You have that kind of default validation. You just rip it right out, right? All you do is basically take that big tool validator class, put it in a separate Python file, and then basically just import it back in. You can save yourself all that kind of bouncing back and forth. It really kind of allows you to do debugging type work a lot more efficiently, and it becomes less abstract at the same time. Now, Python toolboxes, that's all Python code, so that's a little easier right there. We don't have to worry about that kind of level of stuff. But when it comes down to debugging only works directly off a Python file, PYT, Python code, but not a Python file. So that's really more just kind of breaking up PYT to kind of basically be just that little piece that the ArcGIS, Pro or desktop will recognize, and most of the code will live in an actual PY file, adjacent to that. All right. All right, now this is where I get to see if I still have my wits about me and get my brain kind of organized. All right, so let's start with we'll start with this tool. So someone came to me a couple years ago, asked me to create this tool. I'm going to run it first, and then we'll kind of talk about it, and then we'll do some work with it. Yeah, my computer's aligned with me, huh?
Just remind me,
yesterday I was cleaning some stuff up, and one thing I'm going to talk about later is building building like toolboxes and modules and kind of what that gives you. And I was doing some pretty dumb stuff, making mistakes, and I totally blew it. And I realized that that could cause some problems like that, and I hope that's, maybe that's what that is. What's the word I'm looking for here? No? No. Nope. Don't need that, that's for sure. Yeah, what would it be without a little drama, huh? Okay, let's try that again. Oh yeah, this is, I don't know if you've ever seen this. This is an off-topic thing. I use Wing for the odds. It's like, I like it as kind of like a simple editor. For more complex projects, I'd use other things. But I've noticed like when I flip the display back and forth, you see how the code has these like big chunky spaces in there? It's not actually there. I can't explain why that happens, but. All right, so it's coming up. All right, so yeah, so this is a classified raster, just, you know, classified into different types, right? You got urban, forest, so forth. Cross your fingers. All right. I'm afraid, but okay, that looks better already. Yeah. All right. Small victories, right? Okay. All right, so let's just run this quick. So this is a classified raster. Essentially, all I'm going to do is I'm going to basically clip out a tiny spot underneath this tool. It's using a bunch of spatial analyst tools mostly. A little bit of work with NumPy. This is a feature set control, right? Kind of allows you to interact. So I can draw, say, like a little rectangle. Oh, this looks more interesting. I'll do this right here. So I'll pick something fairly small, start. All right, so it's going to clip that, do some, you know, basically a little analysis inside, and create a feature class with some stats inside of it. All right. All right, so there it is, a little subset. And attribute table. It's really just kind of trying to figure out like continuous areas, do some stats on that kind of thing. You can see, right, biggest chunk is just that stretch of grassland. Okay, so the tool itself is almost secondary to what I'm trying to show, but that's something we can look at. So validation, right? So, you know, I come in here and I decide, hey, I want to do something on this. If I was doing this in ArcMap, right, same kind of thing, I'd have to click on this button, it would open an editor. It's Pro, so I can do that, or I can edit it right in Spot. So let's do something pretty plain and vanilla, and let's just add a message. All right, just a little good morning, nothing fancy. All right, I did that. I don't know if you caught that. That was all wrong. That should have been. Right, you know, the big error. Okay. Right, so, you know, this is kind of the thing you get into when you do validation, and it's buried in the toolbox. So, all right, of course, that shouldn't have been set warning. It's set warning message. But, you know, what's actually a lot better is if I can just, you know, take all that, blow it away. So I've already taken that out, and let's see, yeah. Okay, this is what that is, even if it looks a little funny, right? So what I'm going to do now, really all I got to do, it's located in the same location as my toolbox, so I don't need to do any fancy work of finding the paths, but I'll just actually, hold on. So a few things. Okay, so I gave it the same name, so I can just do from LCS validation, import my tool validator. Now, that'll be good enough when I'm like actually running the tool kind of in a production mode. When I'm working on it kind of like interactively, you know, validation, right? You can do a bit of back and forth. You know, like I can't like really like refresh the tool in a true sense and like reload my code. Like I'm in a, you know, I'm in an interactive application that when I import something, right, it's been imported. Next time I come along and import it, it's like, yeah, you already imported that. I'm not doing anything extra, right? So kind of got to force the reload. So now because I did a from style import, right, I got to go through a little bit more, but I'll import that thing again. I'll import something called import lib. You may be familiar with that. And then I'll just reload it. So essentially all that's going to give me is that now, right, these three lines are all temporary at the top. So I'm happy with the code, right? So, okay, so now, let's slide that over there. Let's do some compressed real estate. And, all right, even though this looks kind of funny. All right, so if I want to make any changes, all right, yeah, I don't know if it's a good morning. My tire got flat, so that's a question mark. Yeah. Right. Okay. So now, right, if I come back in, let's see here. Yep. And again, right. Warnings don't get fired until the second time. Oh, but I did it. Oh, okay. I do need to go back in here because I can't type. Import lib, not import lib. All right, so right. So this is just kind of a little trick. I don't know if it's a trick, but it's going to save you a lot of hassle. I don't know how much validation stuff you've got into in the past, but that's always the kind of pain in the, you know. Just having it kind of outside too, right? You know, you do any kind of code management, right? It's not in this opaque TBX file. You don't know what happened historically, right? You have it outside. It's cleaner. You can see it. Easier to change, easier to fix. All right. Now, so I suppose most of you probably saw the plenary, right? Sean was up there for a few minutes. So Sean's on my team. He did a little bit of the debugging story. Right? Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit more of that. All right, so that was a toolbox. This is a Python toolbox. This tool, you know, it's just kind of like an interesting tool. Look at Linda Beal. I don't know if you know her. She works at Esri. She's down the hall from me. She does some interesting work. So she created this tool with like a Swiss hillshade effect. Let me run it. So this is Lake Tahoe area, all right? This is this little shortcut. I don't know if you've seen that before. Instead of having to remember where things like the scratch GDB is, I can just type that in and it'll write it off there. Okay, so let's let that run. All right. All right, so, you know, it's kind of an interesting, like, effect, right? I kind of like that. Cool. All right. Now, thing is, right, you run script tools of Python toolboxes in the past. you never really had like a clean ability to debug it. It was always like these kind of weird tricks you had to play. I mean, you could run your source code, you could run a tool, but you couldn't like step into the code, like either the validation or the source code, really. Particularly the validation, right? You always had to, you could play tricks like, there's some things I did. Struggling with some debugging concept, like, I'll create like an empty parameter and I'll push messages into it. Or I'll create just messages, put them on the parameter. Lots of kind of like weird hacky stuff. But we don't have to worry about that anymore. So let me go back to the slide just for a second. Where did that go? All right, yeah, so these are some of the just crazy weird things I had to do in the past. So now we can debug in Pro. So I'm going to use Visual Studio 2017. So if you have that, CodeWorks 2, PyCharm, I think, if I remember, works, but with some warts. So at Visual Studio 2017, I put on a Python development tools package. And then, right, the other caveat, right, is that needs to be in Python file, right? So you can't debug TBX directly, you can't debug the PYT directly. Okay. All right. Yeah, on this, actually, just one word. One of the guys on my team, he's written on a blog. I have it in my inbox. I'm supposed to review it, so it's going to be out in the next week or two. So if there's any details on this, of course you can ask questions, but we'll have more out on the Esri blog pretty soon about how this all works. But all right, so there's Visual Studio 2017. Let's pull in the file I need. Oh, now this is where all right, let's come back here. All right, so there is my PYT. So I want these two files. Okay. All right, so there wasn't much into validation, but we'll just put a breakpoint there, and we'll put a breakpoint here. Now, so open up Visual Studio, really just debug, attach the process, and then this needs to be Python code. Find your Pro. I got 2 open, so that's the one I want, and then attach. All right. Now, one thing, I'm not sure if this is me, this one gets, down here, the Python exceptions, that gets, it's toggled off by default for me. I just click that on. The one thing that's kind of interesting about this, it catches exceptions even if they're trapped or not, right? Which, I don't know if that's intuitive or not to you, but that throws me off a bit. So, all right, so you just got to click that on. All right, so now we're connected. So if I come back in here, and here's this tool, let's back out. All right, okay, so I clicked it, right? Yeah, continue on that one. Where am I going? Getting buried in there now. Oops. That's not what I wanted. There, turn that off. Haha. All right, so now what did I do? Let's just try that again. Well, what have I done to myself today? All right, let's try this. Oops, scratch. I am pulling in the right file, right? And that should match with. All right, yep. All right. Okay. Somewhere along the lines, I clicked something I shouldn't have. Yep. All right, well, that didn't go like the way I wanted. Let me try, let's just do. Okay, all right. And okay. Actually, all right, try that one more time. Patch process, Python code. 2 pros up, the right one. Still got my and okay. Right, okay. Cross your fingers again. I don't think that did it. Well, let's see. You have to take with it.
Yeah, your tool doesn't match the script. You're running Swiss Hill Shade, but your code is.
Am I using the wrong tool?
That's what she was trying to tell you before.
That would be something I would do. Yeah, look at that. All right, so yes. Check my little notes here. Yeah. All right, I'm not as crazy as it looks. I'm just not that bright. All right. Yeah, okay. All right, hey, look at that, okay. Right? The validation gets fired all the time. So, right, just opening up the tool, right? So, hey, even though, right, it's still kind of coming up, right, this gets triggered. So I'm gonna turn that one off because I don't actually want to show anything in the validation much, but you can get into it, right? That's a big thing. You know, like just knowing what some of this stuff is, like, you know, things like altered, has been validated aren't always conceptually that, you know, obvious. So it's like being able to kind of see what this stuff is without having to like do a bunch of weird hacky stuff. Big change. All right. Now, so that's just opening the tool. So let's come back, continue. All right, now it's just come back over here. Let's reuse that. And actually, let's let's run that. What did I do now? Well, I was going to show you some debugging, but that's not the error I was trying to produce. All right, I don't want to fall behind on what I was going to do, but I was trying to show there, right, you can debug now in like a meaningful way, right? It's not this kind of like, especially the validation kind of from a distance, can actually get in there and see what's happening. I think especially in the validation, that's going to be a big advantage, kind of figuring out how these things work. All right. Boom, boom, boom. All right, so that's kind of, right, that's just the process really, right? Oops, attach the process, select Python's code type, attach, and then, once you see that little orange bar, you're ready to go. Okay. Now, one thing that we've had for a few releases now is being able to take like your tools and kind of wrap them up as a package and have them, like a Python package, and have them be more than just a toolbox, like kind of sitting off to the side, right? Toolboxes are a nice vehicle for kind of sharing functionality, right? You create your toolbox, you know, hand it off somehow to somebody, and then, you know, they got to locate it somewhere, right? You know, which, you know, it's fine. You know, they can run it from there, right? Having it kind of like play nice, just like it's like just like any other toolbox, like something in data management, is kind of what this little bit of story functionality can give you. All right, so. All right, so yeah, the Swiss cell shade, that was what I went wrong with. That was this demo, not the other one. So, all right, so we saw a little bit of Swiss cell shade. What I want to be able to do is turn that into one of these packages. All right, so let's drop kind of out of here. I'm just going to stage some things first. So over here, demos. Okay, so the three files that matter most to me. So that's my Python toolbox. That's the that has the Hillshade tool. This is some code that goes with it, right? Because I broke up the Python toolbox. It's just the toolbox class. All the rest of the code is over here, but it also then calls this. So I'm just going to take all of that and let's put it right here. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of create a little Python package and drop this tool into it. All right. So yeah, I'm just going to call this package Hillside or Hillshade. There's not much in it, right? This is just kind of the show, right? This is the tiniest package possible, but with this toolbox included. Okay, now, let me open. Depending on where you're installed, this may not be necessary. I'm installing program files, so I need admin rights to write into the Python site packages. So I'm just going to run this as an administrator. If you're like a per user install, you're in app data, you wouldn't have to be concerned with that. Okay, so let's go to D, temp, what was that, source? I think? Okay, let's go into that folder. All right, so there's this little bit of a hidden function called, get this right, create toolbox support files. So I'm just going to give it my toolbox, and it's going to kind of create some of the pieces I need to go with this. Yeah, I don't know if anyone knows that shortcut. This saves me so much time. Just like shift, select, your mouse button, you copy as path. Minor thing, but I like it. All right. so import ArcPy, and then we'll run this thing. Essentially, it's just going to create like some XML files. It's going to wrap it, like an ArcPy wrapper for it. And only once. Choice. Yeah, there we go. All right. All right. You can kind of see in the background a little bit, right? Created some extra stuff. Now I'm just going to rearrange this slightly. So I'm going to go in here. All right, you see this is some of the stuff that got created. There's an ArcPy folder, there's a help folder. I'm just going to create toolboxes. And I'm going to go back and let's put all of this, except for that, in here. All right, so this is like the tiniest little Python package, right? I got a little package called Hillshade, which does almost nothing except it has this toolbox inside of it. All right, this is really just kind of like a little bit of infrastructure so that Pro and ArcMap will recognize it as what it is. Now, so this is pretty simple. I could just take this and copy it and put it into my site packages folder, right? And then it's just there. You can also do some things like this. This is just, you can use this utils, you can use setup tools. These are just little things in the Python world that you can use to kind of help package up your package. Really all this is doing, kind of identifying what it is, and then, you know, there's kind of the supplementary directories. We're just identifying them so it groups it all together. All right, so if I come back here now, let's exit. Still in the right spot. Nope, down one. All right, so then it's just called Python, do my setup, py. I don't need, let's close that. Sure. And then, all right, so all that stuff, basically, it's building it into my little package, but at the same time, it's also installing it. So if I go back over here, or back to here, this is deep into Pro's guts where my environment is located. Right, see that, right, so there it is. Now, if I did everything correctly, when I open up Pro, that should, you know, then be just another toolbox. So this would be in Pro, right? You can have different environments, right? In desktop, you really just have the one Python location. Pro, right? You can have different environments. So, you know, any project that you open that uses that environment, right? That toolbox would then be in. So if I come in here, toolboxes. Right, so that's that tool, right? It's now kind of like a full player. You know, if you have some client users, you know, people in your office, you want them to just kind of set them up easily so they can find that kind of stuff, right? There's the tool. And it's, you know, if I do the search, right, it's going to see the same thing too. Right, this is the one that I had that I used earlier. This is the one that's kind of looks like it's part of the install. As a little sweetener, you can also get to these things as in Python too, right? So that you can always, right, you know, import toolbox, you can always import your custom tools using that, but when you do this pattern, right, it comes right in, and you could use it from ArcPy directly without that step. Okay. Okay. Okay, so if you were in the session on Tuesday, I did have this one slide in there somewhere. This is really the main two purposes for validation code. So, right, there's really three parts to a tool, right? You write your source code, and that's the good stuff, what the tool actually does. There's, like the parameters, and then there's the validation. So the validation is this kind of optional area, but gives you these two main things, right? You can, kind of fine tune, improve the experience of how that tool works, right? Checking relationships, checking extra checks to test, if something is valid or not. But there's also sort of this model builder case, right? Where you can get your tool to kind of work properly in model builder. So this is like this giant table, but I just want to kind of splash this up. We'll get into this a little bit, a couple minutes. This is kind of all the things you can do with basically that second case, right? The model builder case, right? It's basically telling your tool what its output is going to be or likely to be. It kind of helps subsequent tools, know and be able to properly make the right choices in a model. Okay, so a couple kind of random tips I just want to make sure you're aware of. So this is particularly true in Pro, but if you're in validation code and you use parameter.value off of like a feature layer, if you've done this, maybe you've noticed there's like the wheel spins right here. For it's like half a second, maybe 3/4 of a second. That's validation you want to be like, bam, right? You don't want to set any kind of lag. So avoid parameter.value when you're working with like feature layer inputs, right? It's more obvious in Pro, but there's still a bit of a lag in ArcMap as well. It's a lot easier just either to describe this is for data, right? Describe the parameter object itself, you kind of bypass that. And if you do need the value, just use value as text. I've kind of gotten into a pattern actually of using value as text as much as I can, just so I can avoid that without having to think about it too much. It's just like it's a simpler, faster check. Yeah, and this is going to come up too. So one thing, sometimes someone will be like, oh, you want to be able to do, this with a script tool, but it's not obvious or it's not like visible through the UI. So like, for instance, like in ArcMap, there's a notion of categories. You can pull up some tools and they have those little collapsible sections to the group. You can't set that through the UI, but it's a parameter property. So you can change that in just initialize parameters within the script tool. A few other things like composite data types. Sometimes we'll have, you want to combine data types together, like you want to be able to accept either raster or feature class, right, as your input. You can't do that through the UI and that's in like an ArcMap. You can in Pro, but you just go into your validation code and set it that way, and then it overrides, right? And actually, if you do like that composite one, you can actually see it reflect in the UI. Like it'll say, feature class or raster, but you can't actually pick it, right? But you can kind of engineer it behind the scenes through the validation. And then this is actually kind of a variation on the other one. Again, just using kind of parameter.value. Okay. All right, so let's close a couple things here. Don't need that or that. No. All right, so let's see. I have a couple tools here. It'll work. All right, so let's just kind of use this, and then we'll go back and look at what's actually happening. So this tool is in like a functional tool. It's kind of, you wouldn't use this. This is kind of demonstrating a couple of things. So, right, often you'll have some kind of input data, and you're going to pick like a field from that, right? So this is the parameter dependency. Now this one has two fields, right? I can't like just through parameter definitions, avoid duplicating that, but I can code for that kind of thing, right? So, right, this is my custom error. So if we go, look at the code. Right, way down here, right? This is kind of what I'm talking about, we using value as text all the time, sort of starting to get into that habit more and more. So I'm just assigning the two field values using the parameter values text, and then I'm just doing a couple checks on them, right? One, do they both have values, right? If it doesn't have a value, it's just an empty string, and they're not and if they are the same, put an error message on, right? That's one kind of thing you can do. Oh, sorry? Sorry.
Show the code.
What?
Show us the code again.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, my hearing isn't the best. So, all right. This doesn't. Oh, it does. I forgot about this. Okay. I was thinking about this the other night. How was I going to do this? And yes. Okay. Yeah. All right. So if I forget that again, just remind me to do the update. Right. So we're just pulling in the values that way. Right. Checking that they both have values, checking that they're not the same.
But there's an error on line 7.
Oh, okay, so hold on.
Line 70.
Line
Line 70.
line 70?
Says field.
Oh, yeah. All right, good eye. Yeah, debugging, group debugging. Yeah, see, yeah, okay, I know what I did there. I moved this around to make this more clear, and then I blew that. Okay, well, thank you. Sometimes, right, get multiple eyes on it. All right, thank you. All right, so the other thing you can get into is building like filter lists, like basically, right, keywords, right? Sometimes those are going to be dynamic, where you want to like change what the options are based on what other options are. So, right, so you see this is new and old. This one has a whole bunch of colors. All right, I can change this by, if I have flip it over to old, it just changes the formats to read to less. One thing about that, usually start with all the keywords and move backwards, right? Always start with everything, reduce it as necessary, don't add to it. It makes it kind of more intuitive. But you can also do things like this. So you can see down here, right, this is that category thing I was talking about. So I can do things like, so that's red. If I change it to blue, right, that's actually a completely different parameter visible. Now, if you're in desktop, you'll get a slightly different experience of that. Instead of disappearing, being hidden, it'll just gray it. It'll disable the control. But same effect. It's just the user, whoever's using it, loses that parameter by choice. And then you can do things like, I can turn them both off. Okay. Let's look at that. Let's find a nice medium. All right. So even in Pro, you can do this. You can set categories through the UI. I'm doing it through the code, kind of your preference. Actually, if you do that, it's going to put it into the, do that. Yeah, see, it pushes it in anyways. All right, so anytime you have a keyword choice, anytime really you want to set any kind of limitations on any kind of parameter, whether it's you want to limit like the geometry types, feature classes, that's always a filter list. So yeah, you just sign like that, and then here's another one, and it's really just kind of managing that with those kind of values. So right, you can see here some of those behaviors. So right, if I turn it red, right, these parameters are disabled, hidden by default, right? I can enable them to be true, can change filter lists. I can protect my values a little bit if I've made changes, right? And then that kind of thing as well. It's basically the same case of a different set of values. Now, so there's another little tool. All this tool does is essentially takes like an input, like a line feature class, and it would take like the endpoints of it, store that in a new feature class, and then update that with a field. There's actually a tool that does that. That's the feature vertice to points, but this is kind of a rendition of that. Now, the trick with tools like this, well, it's not a trick, but just a thing to remember, all right, is to make those kind of tools work well in Model Builder. Now, I always give a little caveat here, right? It's kind of like, what are you using that tool for? You know, if it's just a convenience for you, or, you know, a couple people in your shop that know what they're doing. But, you know, if you're giving it out in a more general sense, right, you have people, any level of users that might be using this tool. Models do get used, so just keep that in mind. All right, so this is, what I did is drop that tool into Model Builder. All right, so that's this here. Right, and I connect that tool to other tools, right, what this output is and what it's going to be have a lot of influence on what's going to happen after it, right? What we want to be able to avoid is coming into tools and not having like the right behavior, the right choices becoming available. So, right, so this will create output points, and we know it'll have at least, well, what it's supposed to do is take all the fields from the input, plus it'll add that field, right? We have that little status field. All right, come in here. Yeah, so let's give that a name. It was status by default. Let's call it, well, let's stick to status. All right, so this creates points. This tool takes polygon input, right? That's the kind of thing we want to be able to avoid in models. You know, if people are making a mistake, you know, it'd be better if they were aware that that is a mistake, right? So here, we block that. And I'll show how I'm doing this in a minute. On the other kind of hand, you want to be able to pick valid choices. Let's calculate field, right? It needs the fields from that input. Now, I haven't actually connected any data, right? But it's still going to find, you know, that field, right? Because we know for sure that that field will get created. If I came in here, gave this something else, right, we would expect that field to show up here. Right? The model builder experience really gets kind of hosed if you don't have that kind of information on your output. All right, so let's look at that tool. So this is handled through schema object. You know, any output data will have a schema associated with it. Now, in some cases, it's really just, you know, the input is going to look like the output with maybe the tiniest bit of changes, and create a parameter dependency between them. This one, I'm pretty much just creating from scratch. So that big giant table, right, those are kind of some of the relationships you might pick. And depending on what type of data, it gets limited quite a bit. Like feature data, this is kind of about the extent of it, right? So it's, I know that it's point, so it's, right, so simple point. I'm going to set an extent rule. The fields, I'm going to say it's going to pick up all the fields from my input, right? That's what my little tool will do. But I want to be able to add that additional field, right? That was that behavior where I could see the status field. So all I'm doing here, I'm just taking that value. If there is one, I'm going to create the field object and set the name to whatever they put in. If it's not there, I'm going to put status in anyways, right? And then set the type. And then, right, just pack that on through the additional fields. That is kind of what gives me the opportunity to kind of do that get the output to be what it's going to be, right? That's kind of how Model Builder works, right? all the little outputs have a sense of what they're going to be before it actually happens, right? To help the connectivity of all the tools. All right, I think, yeah. All right. So, I want to talk a little bit about services. I don't have a lot of time. Did anyone get to pick up Drew Ortega's session this week? He had a little demo theater. Okay, this is like the super condensed version, really, of what things he was talking about. So when you build, right, you can take any of these tools. You can take model tools, of course, script tools, and Python toolboxes, and build those into services. Just a couple little things to kind of keep in mind. Right, really the process, really, right, is you run a tool inside, Pro or Map, and then you create the service from that, right? They make sure it works correctly. Note about synchronization. So, kind of when that happens, right, we try and bundle up, make sure everything's going to work when it goes from what you have local to what goes up as the service, right? So, use parameters where you can. If you have like hard-coded paths, hard-coded where, not just like hard-coded where it's like the whole path, but, make sure you kind of build it dynamically, right? That'll help us figure out what the data is, make sure we're creating the paths correctly when it gets pushed back up. This last one actually is a fair point for any tool. If you haven't seen this, I don't know how people use in-memory already a little bit. Yeah, just let me make sure you know what that is. So anytime you create a tool, right, you can, most tools will support, writing out the in-memory workspace. All right, see that? So, right, then you can kind of, if it's like huge, massive data, you're probably not going to do that, right? But if it's, reasonably sized, right, you can avoid writing it out. You can avoid, reading and writing off disk, right? It's just all ready to go into memory. And then, right, just a little bit about, right, project data. So, right, you can find it, right, either through the paths, you can find it based off strings. You can take a geoprocessing package to help store that, right? That'll make kind of the long-term like debugging and development easier. And the validation does get included, but it's usually a good idea to validate, make sure that it actually is working as you're expecting. All right, that puts me right up against the end there. All right, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Publish a GP service with a Python toolbox, that's validation.
So
when I publish to a geoprocessing service from the Python toolbox.
yeah, when you publish a service?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It publishes it away, and it creates for the service a .tdx file, which just points to the source Python. So does the validation get put back into the toolbox from the Python toolbox?
Yeah. You mean like?
When it publishes it.
Yeah, it'll go up with it. Is that what you're asking? Is it?
I was basically asking, because in a Python toolbox, the validation the code, the UAT file or whatever.
Oh, you mean like if you have the file and you've separated that validation?
When you publish, under the hood it creates a toolbox file, which is the process which the service, GP service actually calls. It calls a Python toolbox after that. Even though it's published away onto the whatever slash forever.
Yeah.
So what happens to validation? Does that still get executed separately, or is it loaded into the .tdx file?
Oh, you mean like, if the validation's been separated, will it find
Well,
it?
it's in the Python toolbox, isn't it?
Yeah, it should. I mean,
when it's published as a geoprocessing service, it becomes a .tdx, because the service actually calls.
right. Yeah. Yeah, that should work. I mean, it should bring all the pieces. Part of the process is making sure that it can find all the things. Yeah. Yeah. It's been, I know in some of the earlier renditions it was having trouble finding some things sometimes, but that's been cleaned up quite a bit. So it should bring all the pieces together as you're looking for. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. Or you can come up if you want. Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll stay here as long as you guys need, so if you have questions, just come on up and we can talk. Thank you.